but what the United States does have that is truly unique, and I'm so grateful for, is this religious freedom. And so, um, people ask me all the time, "Oh, this is just a workaround, right? You're just using this as a way to do what you want with psychedelics," and that it couldn't be farther from the truth. This is absolutely 100%. This is my profound personal spiritual practice. The mushroom is it is the most meaningful physical interface for me to access this concept of divinity.
Many people seeking healing find that spirituality and mysticism are a fundamental aspect of the psychedelic experience with psilocybin mushrooms. Indigenous peoples across the world have, since time immemorial, considered these mushrooms to be a sacrament that allows for direct communion with the divine aspects of reality. Those traditions are being reinvigorated and reinvented in modern forms in the United States as a result of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which allows for spiritual communities to operate using psilocybin mushrooms and other psychedelics responsibly as a sacrament, and they do this with considerable legal protection. Today's guest on Chronic Pain Rewired can speak to this better than anyone I personally know. He is one of the most highly experienced psilocybin facilitators in the entire world, having legally administered over 3,000 doses of psilocybin. I'm talking, of course, about Eric Osborne. For more than 20 years, Eric has been an outspoken advocate for the healing potential of psilocybin mushrooms. Having facilitated so many thousands of doses of psilocybin, you can bet that he has seen his fair share of people coming to him with chronic pain problems. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the interview, as well as some of my experiences with psilocybin and pain, but this is going to be just part of the conversation. There's a lot of other important topics to unpack here. Eric founded the first public psilocybin retreat center in modern times, Micro Meditations in Jamaica, back around 2013. However, a few years back, he decided to leave Micro Meditations, and he became the co-founder and lead minister of Sanctuary, spelled with a P like psilocybin, which is a sacred mushroom church based out of Kentucky, and it operates under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Eric has been an invaluable part of my personal journey into the world of psychedelics as my mentor. He's been training me to be an ordained minister and a psilocybin facilitator within Sanctuary. He is the co-host of the podcast Psilocybin Says, along with his wife and fellow co-founder of Sanctuary, Courtney. They also run a psychedelic one-on-one integration coaching business, More Than Integration. It is my pleasure to share with you this special interview with my friend and my mentor, Eric Osborne. Good morning, Eric. How are you doing today?
Good morning, John. I'm doing pretty good, man. Pretty good. Getting some work done and feeling a little more productive than yesterday.
That's good. What were you up to yesterday?
Trying to remember why I exist. It was one of those days.
I've definitely had a few of those myself. So, before we get into the real topics we wanted to discuss today, I wanted to give the listeners a chance to just kind of connect with you a bit and get an idea of your background. For those of you who don't know Eric, well, you've just heard a little bit of what I told you in the intro, but I guess we wanted to just first start with you live in Kentucky and you grew up there, right? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I grew up in small town Kentucky, a place called Springfield. Every state in the union has a Springfield. Ours is the smallest. um, and it was very limiting, you know. There was one street where all of the black people lived. We had maybe one or two gay couples in our town that were constantly subject of ridicule. Churches on every corner, bars on every corner. Typical small town Kentucky. A lot of tobacco farming. Um, yeah, yeah. And somehow, I don't know. I often ask myself, how did I get here in this mental space? Because even as a child, back when I was working when I was working in backer fields, I, uh, I would enjoy spending time with the Mexican hired labor more than I would with the, typical white Americans. Just always have had a real interest in cultural diversity, and knew somehow that there was a bigger world out there. Um, when I was in high school, I ended up arranging a class trip, for a few of us anyway, and some teachers to go to Australia. So I just knew that seeing the world would broaden my horizons, that I would be able to get a bigger picture. And so, yeah, that some formative experiences there, both in the conservative and the more kind of open-minded
Hmm.
sense.
And so eventually that led you to trying out mushrooms, right? That's in some
well,
roundabout way.
well, I
This
always,
was before the
I hope you
dreadlocks,
don't
I
mind.
think.
As you've probably gathered, I tend to use the F bomb occasionally, so I hope you don't
I
mind
got no
here.
problem with that.
But basically, I always like getting fucked up. We grew up on bourbon, we grew up on beer, and from the time I was 13 years old, we were drinking alcohol. And in a more refined sense, I like to say I have proclivity for altered states, which I think there is value there. I know that that is actually a part of human design, and it's
Hmm.
been shown that, um, um, to some extent, the higher level of intelligence or curiosity that someone has, the more inclined they are towards altered states. And I certainly found that to be the case for me. I was always afraid of psychedelics. I was always afraid of cannabis. My uncles were ringleaders in the cornbread mafia. Great, still to this day, it's the largest outdoor cannabis bust in the United States history. And so I was kind of force fed this: all drugs are bad drugs, except for, of course, alcohol and tobacco. Um, and so, yeah, I spent a lot of my younger years just getting lit, as we like to say, and eventually. Um, eventually I got introduced to cannabis from a friend of mine in high school, saw that it wasn't as horrible as it was made out to be, actually fell in love with my first cannabis experience. I was just like, oh my God, this is, yes. And then that kind of slowly led to exposure to psilocybin and LSD. And when I had my first psilocybin experience, it was certainly a recreational experience, but it was it was like I had come home. It was sincerely, I remember when the mushrooms hit, I was sitting on the toilet and I was just like, I saw like the shadow of the toilet paper roll just kind of up the wall, and I was just like, oh yeah, oh yeah, this is my jam here. And so that whole night it ended up drastically shifting my painting style. I've been engaged in visual arts since first year of college. I had a professor at my little small town university in Springfield that really opened my eyes to my creativity, and that single night, even though it was purely a recreational experience, I ended up painting some sculptures and melting crayons and just doing all kinds of wacky stuff. But it influenced my art to this day, and my painting style very much reflects that kind of um, melding of colors and the swirling landscape of the psychedelic
Is that
space.
painting behind you one of yours?
No, it's actually from that
Okay.
professor though. She,
Okay, cool.
yeah, this is a Dogon shaman in the Dogon tribe in Africa doing the 52-year sun cycle
Hmm.
dance, and it's a huge painting that I used to watch. I used to just lay on her couch and look at it in awe. And she told me, one day you can have that painting. And sure enough, right as I entered into a certain level of maturity with psilocybin, and my work took on this more. I still don't use shamanic description, but this kind of energetic work, this work in the spirit world. Um, Very shortly after that, she called me up and said, "Hey, I've got this painting if you're ready for it." And I was just happened to be ready for it. And so it's been a powerful symbol for me over the years of that kind of through line of inspiration and creativity through not just psychedelics, but altered states. I mean, this dance that they're doing, is entering into an altered state whereby information is accessible that is not normally so in ordinary
Hmm.
consciousness.
And what did your early practice with the mushroom look like? Like what was that like for you?
It looked like me eating mushrooms and drinking beer. I'll be perfectly honest with you here. But this is in
Hmm.
1999. I had no idea. There was no direction. There was no
Yeah,
information
there's
out
nothing.
there. It was just these will get you
Hmm.
fucked up, right? All the drug war had suppressed the previous knowledge that we had gained back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, and so it really just looked like me having a good time. But I always knew, even with LSD, whenever I would come out of these experiences, I would think to myself the next day, I would think, I don't know what I learned, but I learned something. I gained something, and I knew that it was inherently different than alcohol. Because with alcohol, you don't gain anything. It's all loss. So there the seeds of that spiritual exploration through psychedelics were being sown at that very early age. And being raised Catholic, there was a certain kind of connection there to this sacramental nature of the mushroom as well, even though it wasn't conscious. But looking back, I can recall early trips that I had. There was one trip that I had where I was walking through a parking lot at like 3 a.m. after a rain, and it was just covered with, this sheen of water and leaves that had fallen in the fall, and I was felt like I was walking on water, and it was very
Hmm.
Christ-like, Christ
Right.
consciousness, and that was one of the first times that I can remember kind of making a something of a connection to this historical practice or this in relationship to mushrooms as a
Right.
sacrament.
And nowadays you're full on into that pretty deeply.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I haven't left the recreation
Hmm.
behind though. I have just learned to assimilate. I've learned the sacredness of recreation, whereas before there was just this like woohoo, let's
Hmm.
just get bent, and now I find that in in this recreation, I am indeed recreating myself. I just came back from an LSD experience this weekend. Um, that was purely recreational but massively therapeutic, massively insightful, connected me so deeply with nature, but had a great time. So I don't think that the two need to be necessarily separate from
Hmm.
each other. There is kind of a maturing that can
I
occur.
had one of those last night.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
LSD.
yeah.
Oh, excellent, excellent, excellent. I'd love to hear more about that.
um, yeah, it's something I've been very measuredly trying out recently, as out of
Hmm.
especially from a place of comparing like the physical work in the LSD space to physical
Hmm.
work in the mushroom space, and turns out that pretty much everything the media and movies and everything tells us about LSD is completely wrong.
Oh God, it's one of the most blessed chemicals. It's one of the most beautiful compounds in existence, and it has been so
Hmm.
misrepresented. Even Tim Leary, I believe Tim Leary has been horribly
Hmm.
misrepresented. Um, I don't think that he ruined things at all. I think that he was just living 40 years in the future. But even this LSD experience that we had, we went for a hike in the
Hmm.
woods out at the big national park here, and I was with a transgender person who was the first time I'd really spent any time, significant time with someone who was transgender, and there was some really wonderful conversation there and some kind of processing of historical trauma for both that individual and myself and others in the group, and similarly, I was able to, for the first time with LSD, I was able to engage with it like a
Hmm.
workspace. Mushrooms have very much become a working space for me, and I can engage with it in a very different manner than I have in the past, and I can use that experience as a way to facilitate healing and energy movement in myself and others, and found that capability for the first time in the LSD space
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah, it's what's striking to me is how different the visuals are, and I was telling my girlfriend LSD is kind of like the happy version of psilocybin. You know?
Happy version.
like,
Yeah.
not that
Well,
psilocybin isn't happy, but it can be so much like it can be so much like feel bad. They're not feel bad. Like here's what you did wrong. Here's all the.
yeah, 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 yeah.
it can be like
LSD
confronting all these things about your past and.
for sure. For sure. Yeah. Yeah. LSD is much easier to direct. It's much
Yeah.
easier to say, to choose what you want to look at and what you want to engage with. Whereas mushrooms are like, guess what? Here's what
Yep,
we're dealing with.
you're on this ride. Better buckle up.
Yep. 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 I know you didn't request this one, but this is what we got on deck. So
But how did you go from going in this recreational space to deciding to open up a retreat in Jamaica for psilocybin?
that was an interesting kind of transition. I started a gourmet mushroom farm in Indiana, kind of a confluence of events. I ended up renting a 87-acre farm up in just an hour north of the river, and moved there while I was teaching middle school. And I had been growing. I didn't start growing psilocybin. Like I fell in love with mushrooms generally, um, hmm, very shortly after my first psilocybin experience. Um, but gourmet edible medicinal mushrooms came to the forefront. Psilocybin actually kind of went to the background because it was harder to access. It wasn't available. It was highly illegal, and I was terrified of being arrested. And so I took to reading Paul Stamets and got really into growing reishi and shiitake and that kind of stuff, kind of at a little hobby scale. And then I started picking wild mushrooms, and felt like it was just um, an illustration of kind of independence. I could collect my own wild, highly nutritious food, and so that was always really rewarding and exciting. And then the way that the psilocybin spores came to me was actually just incredible gift from God. Was sitting at used to go to this bar and hang out with my ex-wife and listen to this band and called Serpent Wisdom. And I hated the bar. It was such a dive bar. I was trying so desperately to divorce my wife, but felt too guilty to do it. And anyway, long story short, there was this old guy that used to sit there and listen to the band too. He was a big, long white beard, long white hair. I never knew his name. I just kind of called him Gandalf in my head. And we would always talk mushrooms. And finally, one meeting after like 5 or 6 meetings, he was like, "So, if you think you had some psilocybin spores, you would know what to do with them." And I was just like, "I've been waiting for this moment. Yes, I've been studying. I've been studying how to grow a PF Tech and all that stuff." And so he met me, wrote so funny. He was like, "Can you meet me at the corner of Jackson and Liberty on Monday at noon?" And I was like, yeah, I actually work at the school at the corner of Jackson and Liberty, and that is my lunch break." And so he's like, "Okay, cool." And he didn't know
Mhm.
that. And so I go out there and stand at the corner. He rolls up on a bike, his hair and beard blowing in the wind, on a bipedal bike, not a motorbike. And he just rolls up, hands me a sport print, says, "May the force be with you," and drives off. And yeah, very shortly after that, I divorced my wife. Never went back to that dive bar because that's where she hung out, and never saw the guy until 7 or 8 years later. I was at my farm in Indiana. I was selling oyster mushroom grow kits
Mhm.
online, locally. And this guy, somebody messages me that has no picture on his Facebook profile, is no, and just like I can't see who it is. They just say, "Hey, I love this that you're growing some oyster mushrooms. Because you sell me a kit?" So I say, "Sure, I'll drop it off." He gives me his address. I go to his house, and the door opens, and we are both just dumbfounded that we are each other. And it was the guy who had given me the spores, and he had forgotten. He didn't know who I was. I didn't know. We were both like, "Oh my God." And he was like, "Oh, I was just like, dude, you changed my life. And so, we reconnected. We reconnected then, and he started coming up and tripping with me. And that's probably when my dosing took on a more serious kind of feel to it. Before that, it was still, I'd have mushroom parties and people come up and we just eat mushrooms and hang out. And, like I said, there's always like some learning that happens, always some growth, but it was still wasn't intentional beyond let's just eat some mushrooms and see what happens. And while that's kind of still what we do, let's just eat mushrooms and see what happens, there's still much more preparation and
Mm-hmm.
intention, and then of course like the intentional integration
Mm-hmm.
afterwards. So yeah, it was really, mushrooms have just been such a holistic influence in my life, and it's not like there was any one single event. There was just this kind of growing engagement and love between myself and the mushrooms. um, and yeah, it's really been a relationship.
And what year did you start micro meditations down there? What was that?
Oh yeah, well, so in 2011, I moved to the farm in '09. Started growing, doing about 100 pounds a week of gourmet mushrooms. That farm, it wasn't making money, so I ended up growing cubes to sell to make some money. Didn't want to, but my wife at the time had family members that were big weed dealers, and she's like, you got to grow some shrooms and sell to my cousin. And I was like, I don't want to, and she's like, oh, we got to, so I did. And so I got really, really, I was growing big time, and was eating mushrooms a lot, very religiously. Starting in about 2010 is when I really got going, and I mean, like, once or twice a month. Um, and like the end of 2011, just feeling the incredible power of this experience, and how this is so much more than I had ever thought it was. This is so much more powerful. This is so much more transformative. People were starting to talk about ayahuasca and all that, and I remember feeling like, God, if people just could take mushrooms differently, if they would take bigger doses more intentionally, they would see that this is just as powerful as ayahuasca. And I had been going to Jamaica every year since 2003. Met some Jamaicans and started going in there. I was really involved with the Rasta movement, hence the dreadlocks. Um, and I was in my lab one night working on some cultures, and there was just this overwhelming, like, you're going to do this. Mushrooms are legal in Jamaica, and you're going to start these retreats. And I was just like, no, 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 that's not for me. I can't. That's too big. I can't do that. And then I would go and take mushrooms by myself, and when I would take mushrooms, they would just be like, you are going to do this. Jamaica, there was this kind of, it. It kept telling me Jamaica is going to be the lighthouse of psychedelic wellness to the world, and you are going to light the torch. And I was like, no way, this is not, no, no, no. And it just, every time I would take mushrooms, it would just pin me to the ground and say this. Um, and then finally, I was like, okay, 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 but why me? Why me? I can't do this. And so I spent like a year in this whole why me phase. And so from 2011 through 2013 is when I kind of I was on this, um, being called, but also resisting, trying. I didn't want to answer the call. It just seemed too big. But eventually, in early 2013, I had decided, okay, I'll do this. I'll do this. And in November of 2013, we did our first retreat there of 6 people, I think. And it was, really ragtag. Just my friends in Jamaica had some guest houses down there, nothing super nice, but on the beach in a real quiet place called Treasure Beach. And I smuggled a bunch of mushrooms down there, and yeah, I just started word of mouthing it. I was still selling psilocybin pretty large scale. I mean, I was producing about 5 to 10 dry pounds a month, so 50 to 100 fresh pounds of psilocybin a month at that time. Um, and so I was too afraid to advertise really the retreats, just kind of letting it be a word of mouth thing. And then in 2015, we were reported and arrested for psilocybin. And at that point, it was all I had left was the retreats as a possibility for income. I don't do well living a life without purpose. It's kind of the struggle I was having yesterday. Is like, if I even if I have like 3 or 4 days where I'm not doing anything, and I'm not saying this is necessarily a good thing, but I can get into a pretty deep hole of purposelessness. Um, so that was, wow, you talk about some fulfilling work. Something that gave me a real sense of purpose at that time was to be the first psilocybin mushroom retreat in the world. And after we were arrested, and my master's degree was basically null and void at that point with, 3B felonies, um, I just put all my chips into Myco. And that was right about the time Michael Pollan's book came out in 2016 is when his New Yorker article came out, and that started to generate some interest. And because we were the only place on the map, then we'd get quite a few hits through Google. Um, and then 2018, when his book How to Change Your Mind came out, it just set off a cascade, and I was overwhelmed. Took on some partners and started growing pretty quickly there. Um, and then, yeah, that evolved into its own thing that we learned a whole lot from. That I am confident we are applying in a much more meaningfully and a much higher impact at Sanctuary.
What did the retreat experience at Myco Meditations look like?
Um, well, it started out with 4 doses. I was doing 10-day retreats with 4 doses, and that was just too much. And honestly, we ended up pulling back to a 7-day retreats with 3 doses, and I still think that's too much, honestly. There are some people that benefit and even need like 3 doses in a week, but for the vast majority of people who are brand new to this world, that is just it's a lot to
Mm-hmm.
process at once. So people come down and pick them up at the airport, drive them down the 3 hours into Treasure Beach, get in there, settle in. The next day we do kind of a intro, get to know each other, take a low dose, see how everybody responded, do an integration the following day, take a break, and then the next day we do another dose, kind of
Okay.
repeat. And but usually we would be raising the dose as the week went on, depending on the individual. And as time went on, and I became more confident in my own capability and more confident in the medicine itself. Um, I kind of switched that up, after observing people who were just catatonic depression or anhedonia and massive levels of social anxiety. I started to find that it was more effective to give some of those individuals higher doses on the outset and lower the dose as the week went on, and sometimes even no third dose. Um, so, yeah, they also, from in the early days, we tried to incorporate some sightseeing and stuff. I have always had a deep love for Jamaican culture, and I wanted to expose people to the culture, and so we'd go out to different places and kind of see some of the area. And while that was nice, it just crammed the week with so much. I mean, you're taking 3 hits of psilocybin, and some people doing like 10, 15 gram doses, and then going out to, a restaurant on a bluff and all this kind of stuff. It's just like, chill the fuck out. Let the medicine do the work. This isn't a vacation per se. And then as time went on, my partners, they kind of wanted to get more clinical with it. I'm very much mushrooms in nature kind of guy. I still very much believe that that's where they're most effective. I am, uh, I trip barefoot always, always, always. I cannot trip with shoes on anymore. And that's the kind of stuff that I encourage people, particularly those who are like city dwelling. And, a lot of our depression and a lot of our anxiety comes from this disconnect from nature. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was always trying to facilitate that experience more than the blindfolds and playlist experience. You can do that
Yeah,
anywhere,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
I don't know. I
so,
can't do the blindfold
hmm,
in music personally. I just can't do it. I
yeah,
got
yeah. I mean,
my
I
first
dabble.
experiences were like movement was so integral that that's just like where I naturally go.
Hmm, hmm. And it will evolve for you over
Hmm.
time. I mean, it certainly evolved for me, and it evolves for everybody. If this is a practice that you incorporate into your lifestyle, then as time goes on, you gain insights, and as you grow, then you start to kind of process
Hmm.
and work with it in different ways. So yeah, they kind of wanted to go more the clinical route. They wanted to go more the upscale, like $10,000 retreats. When I started those retreats, I didn't pull out a calculator. I was just like, $1,000 for 10 days. I was doing a 10 day retreats for $1,000 that included meals, uh, ground travel, lodging, and all the facilitation. I was losing my
Yeah.
ass. The company was just going underground quick. Um, but then, I'm there is a middle ground, right? There's a middle ground. You don't have to lose money in order to help people, but you also don't have to become a
Hmm.
millionaire or whatever. And so like the $10,000 luxury retreats are just, for
Hmm.
me, don't want it. Did some of those at the behest of my partners, and it was just too weird, man. Like there was this one place we did that was like all white glove. And first of all, like, as a student of post-colonial literature, that was my minor. My major is in English. I have always had a real problem with the colonial legacy in places like Jamaica, and so to go to a beautiful, mansion on the seacoast, and then have a bunch of black Jamaicans and literally in white gloves serving you 7-course meals on silver platters after a mushroom
Seems
trip
like,
is the
yeah,
antithesis.
yes,
Yeah,
that was the first word,
yeah,
antithetical.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what comes to mind,
Yeah.
man.
So when that started happening, that's when I knew that I was going to be shifting gears. I
Hmm.
had no idea that it was going to go, like it has towards sanctuary and this kind of uh, place that we're at now. But I knew that we weren't aligned in our kind of motivations or
Right.
experiences.
So I know I want to talk a lot about integration here in a bit. So what did
Mm-hmm.
integration before, so we can compare like micro meditation or just kind of the retreat experience in general to what's going on now with things like sanctuary. What did integration look like at micro meditations for you?
Well, and I also want to say that I acknowledge that there is a place for the way that it's going
Hmm.
there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
There are people that want and benefit. So
Hmm.
I'm not denouncing Myco or
No, no,
anything like
definitely
that.
not.
It's just I'm a fucking redneck, boy. I'm down in the dirt. That's just my style. But integration in those experiences is the topic of integration is huge in and of itself, right? You can't it's very difficult to talk about integration in a holistic manner in a short
Oh yeah.
conversation, much less to actually integrate your
Hmm.
experiences in a very narrow time frame. So what we were doing, and kind of what still is the modus operandi for retreats like that, is the day after a mushroom session, then you will have a 2 to 3 hour group integration, which generally comprises of reflecting on the experience and what its significance was or is to the individual at that time. And there's a lot of value there. You can pull a lot of great material out. You can bring a lot of insights to the table. An effective facilitator of integration, particularly in that group context, can really elucidate behaviors and underlying thought patterns that lead to behaviors, and having that reflection of the folks around you is extremely valuable. Even within the experience, the kind of playing off of each other's experience that organically occurs can offer a lot of valuable insights into your own kind of ways of operating or perceiving the world. And so that's kind of how it would be. It would be the day after a trip, you'd spend a couple of hours, and then you do more unofficial, or at least I would. I always spent time with every individual throughout the week. After that formal integration, just kind of digging in a little deeper and trying to help them just kind of explore the content of their experience a little more. Now, what we're doing in Sanctuary is, I feel like, is has it has the potential, if it isn't already, much more powerful, because the integration is not confined to this, you know, small window. there is the ongoing community, there's this ongoing reflecting of other people's experiences that happens now. We're 2 years in the works right now, and so now we've got people that have been with our community for that long who are you know, continuing to process these
Hmm.
experiences over a much, much longer window. And that's, I think, one of the most valuable aspects of the psychedelic experience is that they continue, as long as we will continue to engage with the material, those experiences will continue to teach us for the rest of our
Oh,
lives,
definitely.
you know.
Uh, this uh, this idea that integration is just you go and do one type of talk session or something. Not that there's no value in that, but if you just leave it
Mhm.
right there, that's a very unfortunate outcome, I think, for many people.
You've just lost so much. And what we're doing now too, that's beyond this kind of um communal reflection and just talking about our experiences. What we're starting to do
Hmm.
anyway with these the music workshops and like your posture workshops and the art stuff that Laura's doing, a lot of people that are doing, bringing in different modalities into our
Hmm.
community. That's also integration, right? And so to be able to, for integration to be this holistic, all encompassing, your diet is part of your integration work, your exercise, the ways that you talk to people and how you engage with your family and your community. You know, integrating a psychedelic experience does not mean just like reflecting on what it means. It means actually integrating those lessons into your life.
Hmm.
So, yesterday when I was having, the second half of my day was just this miserable, you know, depression, sense of worthlessness. Years ago, and I when I say years ago, I mean actually back in Jamaica, I did not have the tools myself to pull myself out of those holes for 3 or 4 days sometimes. And today, waking up, remembering how I felt and remembering what I've experienced from our community, remembering what I have, shared and told others, I was able to sit myself down, take 20 minutes, meditate, journal for another 20 minutes, and rewrite my fucking story and switch things around in a way that I could never have done. I was more suicidal in Jamaica working those retreats than I've ever been in my entire life, ever. Because I was so disconnected. I was helping all these people. People tell me all the time I'm saving their life, blah, blah, blah. And then they're gone. And I'm still like the boss of these employees, and no, nobody wants to see me be weak,
Hmm.
because I'm supposed to be this leader. And so like I just, when I walked away from Myco, I was determined to never put myself into that position again. And with Sanctuary being able to be a member of the community, not just an authority figure, it's saved my life. You and your story and so many other people in our community inspire me, I know, just as much, if not more, than I inspire others.
Hmm.
So the beauty of this community integration of us all being on equal ground, there is no expert per se. We're all just helping each other through this life. It really embodies that teaching of Ram Dass. We're just walking each other home.
Right.
I can't stand this. I can't stand this. This particularly in the psychedelic space, this idea of there being some expert leader who is, paving the way.
Hmm.
We're all bushwhacking this thing together. And any of these psychedelic leaders, so to speak, who are presenting themselves as um, without vulnerability, who are spouting off the science and telling you how the things work, and they're not talking about their own tribulations and how they have overcome, not just through psychedelics but through the work that they
Hmm.
do personally and through the community that they engage with, then it's really just like, I don't believe that it's true. I have this. I've had a lot of experience with people in this field, and I talked to a guy the other day who told me I'm a I'm a trigger. I trigger people in this work because I do speak very blatantly about this kind of um, psychedelic exceptionalism that seems to be out there. There's a lot of people out there talking about how great psychedelics are and how they had this trip that saved their life and now they want to be a psychedelic leader. And this is just like that's like a 2 year window of their
Mm-hmm.
life, right? They probably did have a great psychedelic experience and they probably have found some relief from their depression right now. But like the show ain't over,
Nope.
folks. The show ain't over, you know? And so I just like I really truly I want to be the most authentic human being that I can be, and I want to help people understand that psychedelics are they are powerful tools, but they are only effective, truly effective when used in conjunction with community and intentional personal growth all of the time.
And
You
they've
know,
got to be
and on the
approached with
psychedelic side.
respect. That's that is
Absolutely, absolutely.
these are not tools to be taken lightly. They just
Mm-mm.
I think they're just as much potential as there is for good. You could use these things for just as bad too. And
Oh yeah.
I
No, I mean
mean,
they're in the shamanic cultures, there are the traditions of the brujos
hmm
that were the dark magicians who used, psilocybin and other plant
hmm
psychedelics. It's not just one thing. So yeah, yeah, we have a lot to learn as a society, and I do feel like this kind of Pollyanna perspective that's being generated around psychedelics has the potential to do some significant harm, but also have faith that it's all going to work out.
yeah, there's I really resonate with what you're saying. If anyone ever tells me they're an expert in psychedelics, I'm gonna be like, fucking God come down and bless you with this or what? Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
if you've been in the space enough, there's, to me at least, no denying that we just know so little. We just know so little.
Dude, oh my God. I mean, the last mushroom trip I had with Charles, from Sanctuary, I was just like, I don't know anything about this
Yeah.
work. I know nothing about. I mean, I've taken mushrooms 500 times at least, minimal. And the more I work with psilocybin, now there was this point where I thought I knew, like in the early
hmm
days, I thought I knew. I thought I knew. But if you keep at it enough, and particularly if you keep working as a facilitator enough and you keep helping other people with their experiences, you will come to realize that this is this is like what do you call it, a roulette wheel with an endless number of slots. You just never know what you're going to land on. You never know what you're going to get, and you just got to kind of just that not knowing is the most valuable perspective that I take into the work. And whenever I go into facilitate experiences with other people, or even just in my own personal experiences, I go in intentionally saying to myself, I do not know what's happening. I don't know what's going to happen. I just want to I want to be a vessel of healing. I want to help in any way I can. I want to be of service in any way I can, but I have no idea what's going on.
hmm
And then things happen and you get intuition, you get this kind of intuitive sense of what's happening. And, somebody might be having a really challenging experience or some really weird stuff might be going on. And, you know, in the moment, you can sometimes offer some insight through intuition, but intuition is not cognitive knowing,
No,
right? It's
it's
that direct experience. And even still, there has to be this sense of this is my perspective, and my perspective is not the only perspective.
yeah. This that came up. This kind of intuition sense. I facilitated a session this past weekend, and it was, yeah. I was taking this guy through all these different positions and things like that, and at one point he his body just kind of takes over, like completely takes over.
Hmm.
And that's that's what I was hoping to happen, but you never know. And
Oh man, I'm so curious how this is. Go ahead. Sorry.
so um, get into. I'm going to do an episode on this later on, but with this person, the visuals when he got into this one position, and I noticed there was his feet, one of his feet was like this, and the other foot was, it was kind of like this type of thing going on with the 2 feet. Their feet were pointing up towards the ceiling in this position, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I go and put like a block and a strap around him, around his ankles, to get the feet back into a proper position. And as soon as that happens, half of his field, he has his eyes closed, but the visuals are all happening over here, and it just goes black over here as soon as I correct
Hmm.
this position of the foot. And then he starts to realize that he was describing it as like seeing the circuitry that was controlling his feet and his hip and his shoulder, and he's starting to notice this complex relationship between all three of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, as he was starting to like repair that cognitively, it was, the field of view was changing from black to white, and kind of going back and forth. But it was like all these fractal patterns, the way he was describing it, fractal patterns over here, and just either black or white field of view over here.
Ah.
And then at a certain point, he just kind of fell over to the side. He was laying down, but he rolled over to the side and just started. I had taken him through maybe a dozen exercises by this point, and then at
Mm-hmm.
some point it was just his body took over, and he started moving in all these weird ways. But he was doing. He said, "It's telling me to do this," And as he was doing this, the field of view, the visuals start to. Uh,
Oh, wow.
it was this whole
I'm
like
so
somatic
excited about this work.
experience. But I mean, what is that?
Oh, you're really onto something. You're really onto something here, John, and I'm very, very excited about this. Um, several years back, there was a about a year where the experiences just kept telling me posture is everything. It's all about alignment of this circuitry, just like you're saying. And so I think you are really onto something here, and I'm very excited about the results that you're going to be able to get with people, particularly in that integration
Mm-hmm.
afterwards. If you're working with people
Mm-hmm.
for weeks and months after these experiences, it's very, very exciting. I think you're doing some groundbreaking stuff
Yeah,
here.
it's the results from this one session so far are very promising. um,
Hmm. Oh,
this
I bet.
uh, completely different issues with sensations in this person's fingertips, so completely different issues or difference in how the hips are working. And these are, I've been working with this person for 2 years, non psychedelically. This is
Okay.
the first time we've
Hmm.
integrated the posture work and the psychedelics. And
Hmm.
all these issues that, yeah, so there are so many issues that can be solved from just this structural compensation dysfunction relationship. One system doesn't work, another system works harder. But I think so many of this stuff, there's at a certain point when we start to stop seeing progress, I think it's something about the brain just having these patterns, the body having these patterns just hard coded in. Essentially, it can't envision working the other way. We started talking to his hip. We said, this muscle in your hip it's been protecting you for so long, and he started talking to it, telling it, like, thank you for your service, but it's okay to stop. And that's
Hmm.
when
Hmm.
we started. That was another part of getting this field of view to come through. So I think that's
Fascinating.
yeah. So
With
that's
my
funny.
LSD,
This expert stuff, like who the fuck knows what's going on in this
yeah,
space?
nobody knows. Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Yeah. I mean, I had this experience with LSD this weekend and this has been kind of part of this working space that I've understood with psilocybin. Um, and I don't know how much to go into it. It's interesting, but like when, for instance, when I was talking with this trans person, they were kind of sharing their story, and I was asking some questions, and um, I guess kind of organically in this space, I tend to go into some kind of qigong breath work, and the second I can very powerfully feel that magnetic field between my hands. And this point when this happened, like as they were talking, my arms just kind of opened up involuntarily, and I could feel my left arm kind of get stronger. Um, there's so much. I don't want to go into a bunch of theoretical stuff. There's stuff here that I really want to talk with you about. We need to set some time aside to do that. But there is, it's like this, this quote from Rumi that the wound is where light enters the body. I know that my left side connected to feminine has had a lot of wounding to it. And when I'm working in this space, it is my left side that kind of gets activated,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it almost feels as if it is filling up with energy and bringing on balance, and that in me holding a balance in my energetic system then into my physical system, that radiates out into the space around me and allows others to come into balance as well. And it's not just me, right? My friend Amy was there, and she was experiencing a very similar thing. And when we came away from the immediate experience of that kind of offloading of information, we both were kind of reflecting the same thing, that we felt this balance shift in our system that brought balance to the whole. And you can see it in a group. You can see these things reflect in the individuals. When I was there, and all of a sudden I felt my system just kind of swell up. I was just kind of looking around, and I saw Amy just, she wasn't even looking at me. She just like sat up straight, and her arms went like that. A couple of other people around us, that kind of, you just saw them kind of shift posture, and you can see this kind of poof
Mm-hmm.
of energy move out. Particularly, it seems to, I don't want to say it's not radiating from one person necessarily, but um, when there is this stored, I don't even like to think of it in terms of trauma. I just like to think of it as information. When there is this backlog of information that begins to release, either through verbal processing, through emotional processing, through physical processing, you see it you see the impact that it has on the people around, and it does kind of, it's pulsing out from all of us, from every one of
Mm-hmm.
us. But as individuals shift and get themselves back into balance, then it helps others in the space get their selves back into balance
Mm-hmm.
unconsciously. Some really interesting stuff going on here that we have, to my knowledge, our culture has explored minimally.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just so much to learn, so much to learn.
Yeah, we've. It's amazing how we can shut down. Excuse me. We can shut knowledge down so easily, but it's a lot harder to build it back up.
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, just think of how much has been lost
Mm-hmm.
over. Yeah, so true.
Even just the 50 years since this Controlled Substances Act, it's absolutely amazing how all that work that was done in the 50s and 60s, and I mean, really psychedelic stuff was going on in the 20s in research areas,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
it's amazing how by like the mid 80s that was just all completely erased from the conscious mind of our culture.
And just through fear,
Mm-hmm.
just through fear. I mean, you
Yep.
look at, we brought up LSD from the start. LSD is the most, still to this day, the most stigmatized
Mm-hmm.
psychedelic. In this group of psychedelic people that I was with, when I brought out LSD, they're like,
Yeah.
I don't know about
Oh, I,
that.
I was I was that way
What's
for
that?
sure. I mean, I what else can we know that other than what society tells us? I mean, until
Hmm.
we go and
Well,
try something
and
ourselves. I have
yeah, but
lots
like you said,
of
though,
wrong mispreconceptions about it.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's because of miseducation.
Mm-hmm.
The truth was pulled away. There was plenty of research. LSD, very high doses of LSD was being given to very young autistic children in the 40s and 50s, and it was reversing their condition. You had children who were nonverbal, who were self-mutilating, and they were given like 1,000, 2,000 mics of LSD, whereas 100 mics is a
Yeah.
typical dose,
Hmm.
and they complete reversal of symptoms. And all this stuff was documented, and much of it was destroyed. For any listeners out there interested in, I don't have the book right, it's on my other bookshelf, but it's called Acid Dreams. And it goes back into the research from the 20s, 30s, 40s that you were talking about. LSD, DMT, um, and psilocybin came later, but yeah.
I just
So
reached
we
out.
got
Yeah,
a lot to make
I
up.
just reached out to
Mhm.
a guy a few days ago who does work with LSD and autism. He's autistic himself. Uh,
Oh
we'll
yeah,
see if that goes anywhere for an interview. I really hope it does.
yeah, it'd be awesome.
um, so you left Micro Meditations when, like 2020, 2021?
Oh God, where are we? 2023 now. So it was the tail end of 2020 that we left Jamaica, and pretty much it was like September of 2020, and by December of 2020 we had decided to start Sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
The attorney that I was working with for the sale of my company, um, he was like, look, Eric, you are by far, he had done a lot of ayahuasca
Mm-hmm.
churches. He was in DC at the time. And he was like, Eric, you are by far the most sincere psilocybin practitioner I've ever met. Like, you are the perfect candidate to set up a church that would be, that could go to the Supreme Court if
Mm-hmm.
necessary. And it's kind of the same thing. Like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. Um, but it just I actually had started a psilocybin church in 2015 up in Indiana with a medical doctor up
Oh, I
there,
didn't know about
and we had
this.
just yeah, we called it the Church of Soma. I had built a very rudimentary website for it, and we had applied the for paperwork and stuff. I was listed on the board of directors, but we didn't have any protocol set up. We just had, it was just in name. And when I was arrested in July 1st of 2015, the church was just not, it wasn't organized enough to be an effective
Mm-hmm.
defense. So while it was very much my spiritual practice at that time. I wasn't set up legally to use that defense. So, um, in many many ways, sanctuary is coming back to my roots. This is not a new thing. This is actually the old way for me. And Myco Meditations, in many ways, was kind of a divergence from that path. And I really felt like the whole time down there, I felt uncomfortable that I wasn't able to speak to psilocybin for off the bat as a spiritual experience, because the vast majority of people that were coming down there had read about Michael Pollan and
Mm-hmm.
Johns Hopkins, and they wanted to relieve their depression, and this was a chemical that was going to fix their depression,
Mm-hmm.
and so I worked with a ton of rational materialists, and I was becoming a reformed materialist at that point myself too. um, because even though this was a spiritual experience, I still was very grounded in science, and I still love science and all that. But there's a whole lot more going on that science is not able to explain.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really wonderful opportunity. I worked with a lot of scientists. I worked with a lot of engineers, very high functioning, highly depressed people who, after they would have a profound psilocybin experience, then I got this wonderful opportunity of helping them integrate it as a mystical spiritual experience. I worked with this guy from NASA who was an engineer that helped design the Mars rover, and he was just like, everything is material. And he had this experience that just like blew all of that out of the water. And so, like, to be able to sit with those kinds of people and help them get a little bit acquainted with the metaphysical spiritual world was really powerful. So from sanctuary standpoint, being able to come back and just from go say, this is a mystical spiritual experience, even when you don't think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I promise people, I've helped hundreds and hundreds of people who have had these, what seemed like a purely psychological or a trauma processing. Somebody spends 4 hours convulsing on the ground, crying out their trauma. That doesn't seem like a mystical experience when you're in the midst of it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can step back and you can kind of if you can explore the phenomena, the trajectory, the content, the energetics of it, then you can really help people understand that every psychedelic experience is a mystical experience. And that is a great joy and a great beauty to me, that I'm so thankful for, within the framework of Sanctuary.
So, for people who aren't familiar with this type of religious use of psychedelic substances, can you give a little background, or at least from your perspective, on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and how Sanctuary fits within that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go a little bit back prior to the RFRA. Start with the 12,000-year-old cave paintings that depict psilocybin mushrooms as part of a spiritual practice. This is the original sacrament. Amanita muscaria mushroom is the longest recorded intoxicant. It's been used in ceremony for thousands and thousands of years. It's not a psilocybin mushroom, but it just shows that the psychoactive mushrooms have been a part of human spirituality from prehistory. And you can research yourself and go through and see that in Catholic, Buddhist, Hindu, Islamic, Jewish sacred art, that the mushroom is it's encoded in an enormous array of religious artwork and iconography. So the RFRA, I feel like, is just like, um, how do I say it? It's a little bit like the scientists telling us that psychedelics are good for us, right? Like, we know we don't need science to tell us that psychedelics are good for us. We have 12,000 years of human historical use. We know they're good for us. We also don't need the Religious Freedom Restoration Act telling us that this is our constitutional right, because the Constitution tells us that it is our right. So it's a little bit of an irony that we kind of continue to need, uh, new permission for what is our God-given right from go. But the RFRA is valuable in that it just continues to fortify that religious freedom that is pretty unique to the United States. I for a long time, even as a child, I thought I was leaving the U.S. I didn't want to live in this place. It's racist. It's backwards. Blah blah blah. And then I went and lived in Jamaica and found out that everywhere's got its quirks. um, but what the United States does have that is truly unique, and I'm so grateful for, is this religious freedom. And so, um, people ask me all the time, "Oh, this is just a workaround, right? You're just using this as a way to do what you want with psychedelics," and that it couldn't be farther from the truth. This is absolutely 100%. This is my profound personal spiritual practice. The mushroom is the most meaningful physical interface for me to access this concept of divinity. We do not know what the divine is. We have all these different ways of expressing it in these different traditions, but nobody knows what it is. We all have a very individual and evolving experience with that. And so, the kind of mechanics of the RFRA are a little different, and I don't know how much you actually want to go into that. Every Just kind of a top level overview of it. In the 90s, Bill Clinton, under his administration, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act was passed. It was initially, it's still, it's funny, the RFRA and the UFO disclosure stuff are both get the most bipartisan support of any bill or movements out there. Um, and so there were only two individuals who opposed the RFRA, two congressmen that opposed the RFRA. It was the most bipartisan supported bill ever. Um, and it was originally applied to all 50 states. It then was contested by certain states because, well, a number of places or people were using the RFRA to um, give them permission to discriminate, because that's your religious right to not serve someone who is in a you know an ethical conflict of your own personal beliefs. And I personally think that that is an individual has that right.
You don't
I
have
don't
to
think it
like it.
is right necessarily. You don't have to like it. Don't have to like it.
That's part of
That's
freedom, though.
that's that's exactly like, I mean, I don't like a lot of the things that I hear people say, but you know what? I love free speech for sure.
Hmm.
So as long as your speech or your action is not hurting somebody, um, physically, I guess there's like all kinds of nuance there, because your feelings can get hurt all the time, and mine do too, by all the political spectrum. But that's the whole thing aside. So they originally, it was applied to all 50 states. That was deemed unconstitutional, and then um, it was shifted to where individual states would adopt the RFRA for themselves, which is kind of ironic in the first place, because again, the Constitution, the First Amendment, guarantees our religious freedom, not some bill that was added in 1996 or whatever. You know, um, so there's a fair amount of nuance there. The states with the RFRA individuals in those states are significantly more protected from being messed with. But if it comes down to it, we already have several precedents set that the constitutional amendment for religious freedom um, will permit this kind of behavior, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. So it's so weird, man. Like, Oregon has gone through this whole legalization of psilocybin, and they are a non-RFRA state. The conservative states are the ones that are most likely to be RFRA, right? Um, Mainly because there was this fear of homosexuality becoming this, degenerative in the
Hmm.
culture, and that we were going to have to make wedding cakes for gay people, and you can't force me to, and all that stuff. And, you know, I think that's dumb as shit. But again, you have that right. And so the conservative states have RFRAs, the non-conservative states don't. In Oregon, they have just, my belief, as we were part of the process of this conversation around the attempt to uh, carve out religious freedoms in Oregon for psilocybin legalization, they just butchered it. Psilocybin in Oregon is for profit only. It is illegal to gift psilocybin in Oregon, the first state where psilocybin is legal. What kind
It's
of sense does that make?
the only thing I can do is laugh because it's just it's so absurd.
It is absurd. And so churches, psychedelic churches in Oregon, have to follow all of the same procedures as a psychedelic for-profit, which means, because of the regulations set up around it, that it's a minimum of $500,000 to get set up as
Hmm.
a psilocybin treatment center or a psilocybin church, right? And that's just, I believe that's unconstitutional. I believe that it is against the welfare of human beings, and it's just setting a horrible
Hmm.
precedent, and it's also limiting the ability for Oregon to effectively bring about the positive change that they say that they want to bring about. I mean, if this is about mental and spiritual health, then we should be making this more accessible, not less
Yeah, they
accessible.
can bring all kinds of healing to the ultra wealthy, but that's about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
30.
Now, Colorado's. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I mean, $3,500 for 5 grams of mushrooms is absurd.
It's insane.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
costs less than $10 to grow that.
Absolutely. No, it's just absolutely insane. So I feel like what we're doing at Sanctuary is really setting a very different standard. Um, I have always, the reason I those retreats were so low cost, the one when I started them up, is because I've always had a really hard time attaching a monetary value to this work. And
Hmm.
even for the years and years and years that I was doing it in Indiana, there at my farm, I never asked for money. I would, if somebody wanted to somebody give me some weed or something, people would like, kind of do nice things for me or whatever. And understandably, we all have to um,
You gotta
survive,
put food
and
on the
I'm not saying
table.
that people,
Yeah, I mean,
100%, 100%.
but there's
I'm
a
not
difference
saying that
between
people
that.
shouldn't
Yeah.
charge, but if you're driven, if you are driven by profit in the world of healing, then there is I feel like it's very difficult for that work to stay ethical and
Hmm.
true to its intention if there is a profit motive behind it. Look at what we see in the Western medical world. And if psychedelics go the same route as, standard Western medicine, then again, it's going to be for those who can afford it. It's going to be for, I don't want to say elite necessarily, um, but it's not going to be for the people.
Hmm.
And if there is any medicine that is for the people, it's psilocybin.
It'll,
It's ubiquitous. Psilocybin grows everywhere. Almost every state in the United States has wild psilocybin. There's 200 plus species of wild psilocybin mushrooms that grow in almost every environment except like
mhm.
Antarctica or some frozen tundra, you know. And so this is I truly believe that this is a gift from our Creator for everybody. There's probably like 10%, legitimately, like 10% of the population that should never touch psilocybin because of schizophrenia or other pre-existing mental health conditions. But even those individuals with the right support would become healers in their own right. The way that we have taken the mental health of an individual and pathologized it in every sense is more detrimental to the individual than the actual mental health condition itself.
Hmm. Yeah. Once we pathologize this and tell people, "Oh, you are schizophrenic," it, I've known firsthand, even with physical diagnosis, things like fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome. It doesn't have to be just these mental disorders. Once you pathologize these syndromes that science and medicine can't explain, and once it becomes ingrained as that person part of that person's identity, it is just the problems can often tend to multiply and stack on top of one another, and yeah, now their ego, their sense of self is devalued because they're broken. There's something that's wrong with them, and
Mm-hmm.
no one has anything to fix it.
Yeah.
At
No, I
least
mean, you know,
in the legitimate quote unquote legitimate avenues of healing, at least in our society.
mhm. Well, and I don't even know that like fixing it
Hmm.
is the way to approach it, right? Like working with it,
Hmm.
finding a way to work with your condition. I mean, I would this kind of became apparent to me about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, that um, I had been to psychotherapists a couple of times, and they immediately wanted to put me on medication, like immediately. Despite me sharing like the life challenges that I was experiencing that clearly were exacerbating these symptoms, they were like, "Oh, here's Zoloft, take this," And I tried it. One time I did Zoloft for like 2 weeks. I was like, "Yeah, fuck that. I'll just smoke weed." I will self-medicate before I just completely lose touch with reality or disassociate. But I would certainly be diagnosed as borderline. Certainly, I have all nine traits of BPD. It's been it's had its struggles, but it's also been an incredible gift. And the more when I kind of went through that stage where I realized, oh, I have a diagnosable condition, for about a year there, when I continued to research the condition and when I started to continue to kind of look at the pathology of it, I was as hopeless as I had ever been,
Hmm.
because this was, oh, all of a sudden, now I'm not just sad, or now I'm not just experiencing extreme mood shifts. Now I am this thing, and I will always be this
Hmm.
thing, and I will be fucked forever because of it, you know? And then when I kind of took a step back and realized what I had always said to other people in working with them is that you are not your diagnosis. And I started to be able to be able to observe the traits, right? And at times apply them when it was helpful. I mean, my ability to pick up on other people's emotions and to kind of process that with them is a very powerful tool that I'm so grateful to be able to have. And by an awareness of it rather than a, pathologizing of it, I'm able to kind of pick it up and put it down
Mm-hmm.
a little more easily. Like, oh, okay, now is the time. And then after I go through an extreme state, then I can take time to meditate, center myself, come back to where I am rather than just being kind of all over the place or thinking like this is just who I am and I'm always going to be this way. So
Yeah,
anyway, yeah,
you've got a
it's a
great
can of
episode
worms.
of Psilocybin Says about that I've listened to. So if any listeners are interested in that, look up Psilocybin Says, and I can't remember the name of it, but I'm sure there's something in the title that'll help
Yeah,
them find it. Yeah, I'll
yeah.
I'll try to find it and link it in the episode description. Actually, how about that?
That's cool. Yeah, no, it's out there. I got to. There is a YouTube video that I did under Sanctuary that is called. It says mental illness. It's titled "Mental Illness or Psychedelic Superpower." Because
Yeah.
one of the big takeaways that I've gotten over the years in working with people is that just that those who are diagnosed with these extreme mental illnesses are some of the most powerful healers out there.
Hmm.
It's just learning how to work with your condition, not be subject to it.
Hmm. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. Actually, no. One other thing first. We've talked a lot about the church and psilocybin. Like, I want to give people an idea of. A lot of people might have this misconception about psychedelic churches that it's just going and eating mushrooms all the time, and that's what everyone's doing, right? What percentage of your work
Hmm.
in sanctuary actually involves the consumption of mushrooms?
Yeah, it's a great question. Very little actually. Um, we're trying to move more and more away from this kind of retreat model necessarily. We definitely want to have communal experiences,
Mm-hmm.
um, but it's much more. The medicine work is much more about empowering individuals to work with it on their own and then bring those experiences back into community and process them. We do a lot, as you know, we do a whole lot of community building.
Yeah, definitely.
We do a lot of stuff virtually, do a lot of virtual community online. We do a lot of in-person community here locally. We're working like individuals like yourself are trying to bring in together a community in their own region. So um, that is just absolutely 75% of psychedelic healing comes from engaging in community, being of service to community.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the most of what we do. I'd say if 25% of what we do is actually engaging with the sacrament as a community, it's probably more like 10% really.
I'd honestly be
We get
surprised
together
if it's even that much.
if it's even that. Yeah, I mean, and that like it speaks to two things. It speaks to the power of these experiences to bring people together outside of the experience, and it speaks to
Hmm.
the power of community itself. I mean, that's such an enormous um, have um, aspect of our collective mental illness is this isolation that we have done.
Hmm.
We have created a culture of individual, and then we exacerbated that with the COVID stuff, and so we have got to be coming back together as community. We are tribal, we are communal in nature, and we are not going to be healthy individuals until we have healthy communities. So
Hmm.
that is absolutely the forefront of what we're doing at Sanctuary. And that's the big thing that I learned in Jamaica. I would work with people, they come on retreats, they have an amazing, powerful week, they have all these insights, they would say that they're healed, and then they go back into their home community and they have nobody that they could talk to, nobody
Hmm.
that they could relate to. They couldn't continue processing the experience. They're continually exposed to all the same triggers and all the same stuff. And within a month to 3 months, they're back to square one. And so then what? You're going to pay another $6,000 to go to a retreat in Jamaica every 3 months?
Hmm.
No,
That's
no.
not sustainable.
Psilocybin it's not tenable. Psilocybin a part of a healthy lifestyle. It's not just a one and done, and that's another disservice that the media and some of the reporting is doing here is talking about how one psychedelic experience and you're a new person for a little while,
Hmm.
but it always comes back. So that was the biggest takeaway from our work in Jamaica, is that this work has to be done effectively in community.
Yeah, we are the medicine.
Absolutely.
The psychedelic
Absolutely.
psilocybin's a great tool. We are the medicine. We've got to do the work to
Hmm.
be the medicine. That's what it comes down to, I
Absolutely.
think.
Absolutely. And I see that in you. I see you continuing to show up for community, creating community, and it's people like you that are the fuel that keep me going, because you know, despite what, I guess it's very easy, even in the retreat space, people are like, "Oh, y'all are balling. You're making all kinds of money down there." And it's like, "Fuck, you have no idea the overhead. You have
Hmm.
no idea how much it costs there is in this." And so it's like, it's fair in a sense that these retreats cost $5,000 and $7,000, because they're expensive as hell to run,
Hmm.
you know, and the church, the community. I think there's a lot that goes into that, and so you know, it's just if you're not in this work for the love of it, for the love of community, then you're not going to last.
Hmm.
Period.
So, do people need to do people need to live in Kentucky to be a member of Sanctuary?
Obviously not. Where
No.
you are
Yeah,
out in you're New Mexico. You're in New Mexico, right?
yeah. I'm out here in New
You're in New
Mexico.
Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. Yeah.
how does that
No, and
work
that's
for
one of the things
people?
that, well, like I said, we do a lot of virtual stuff, and we have people that do come to Kentucky for events, and we have people that are doing other things in different regions. Really excited to see that grow more. And one of the kind of motivators in creating this as a nationwide organization is kind of waving that flag for others to see, because there are millions of people out there who are looking for communities like this one. And there are lots. There's like 200 psychedelic churches in the United States right
Hmm.
now, but the vast majority of them are still operating kind of, below the surface,
Hmm.
because there's still a lot of fear. I am exceedingly confident, because of our legal structure, because of the sincerity of our community, because the majority of our practice is not centered around psychedelics, that if we ever had to go to a high court to prove our legitimacy as an organization, that we will have no problem with that. I have no issue with that. So we've got members. We have like 300 something members in, I think, 40 plus states at this point. Um, and people connecting and going and meeting each other around different
Hmm.
states and whatnot. It's really exciting. But I'm also very, very excited about, as we get members in different pockets, about those locations starting to form their own physical communities where people can get together and support each other. We've got a lot of members in Texas, a lot of members in Florida. We've got quite a few members in the Pacific Northwest, um, quite a few on the northeastern U.S., Maine and New York and whatnot. Um, and it's just been amazing to see how those virtual communities show up and support each other. And then, yeah, as it grows and we have more physical community getting together in different locations, that's just going to be amazing.
And by and large, what does this kind of legal protection for members look like?
Yeah, well, so this is a big question. I mean, we could spend an entire episode on this. Um, so, just to kind of go back to the RFRA and the constitutional right. The litmus test for religious freedom is in um, sincerity of use and um, public safety. So, for instance, here in Kentucky, we had the rattlesnake churches. You ever hear of the rattlesnake
Oh yeah.
churches? Oh, look, I
Hmm.
got my little rattle.
Yeah, I
Uh,
saw one on Justified when I watched that show.
okay, so rattlesnake churches are not protected by Constitution, because it's a threat to your life to hold a rattlesnake.
Hmm.
Period. Okay, it is detrimental to public safety. You may be as sincere as shit, and they apparently are, right? But it's still federally and state illegal, because there is such a high risk of public harm. We have an overwhelming abundance of evidence that shows the safety of psilocybin, the efficacy of psilocybin, and the mystical nature of psilocybin. So from a public health standpoint, there's, you know, signed, sealed, and delivered. We're good there. From a sincerity standpoint, those of us who have built Sanctuary, this is our lives. Like Courtney and myself, my wife Courtney, Amy and Athena, who all have been foundational to the building of Sanctuary. Psilocybin has been formative to our spiritual growth. Members that come in, the vast majority of the people that come into our community are very obviously sincere. And those who are coming in exploring primarily mental health benefits very quickly understand that this is a spiritually founded community. And so far, the vast majority of those people have found that to be a helpful perspective. The protection of belonging to the church is significant. We have created multiple programs that will buttress that protection as individuals get more involved in the church. So, the minister programs that you've been through, and this is all has precedent in state level Supreme Courts. The more vested you are in your training and your ongoing engagement with the community, that is just more and more support and evidence for your sincerity. And so most of our private courses that are for members only, we record the roster and we record the calls, not just for the members to have as to go back to and listen to later on if they want to, but also as evidence in court if ever needed. So if anybody ever comes and says, oh, John's just trying to have a wellness organization, that's disguised as a psilocybin practice, we can go back and we can show hundreds of calls that you've been on, right? We can show your registration in all of these programs that clearly show your sincerity, right? So I know that some people have a little bit of a resistance to that because they think, oh, well, then now my name is on some list for the government to find. But that's actually a good thing when it is in the context of an organization that's structured as ours. And so, we spent about 6 months with our attorneys who, were very experienced in psychedelic law. We spent a lot of money with these attorneys, our own money before Sanctuary was ever a thing, just setting this thing up with extensive bylaws, an extensive code of ethics. We have an extensive letter to the DEA on our website. There's this whole conversation about the DEA supposing to give you permission to be a psychedelic church, right? Again, that's a whole big topic. We could go on for hours and hours about that itself. But the bottom line is the DEA is not a religious certification organization, right? The burden of proof is on the government to show that we are insincere, and good fucking luck with that, right? So our attorney, some psychedelic churches will apply to the DEA for this controlled substances permit, and when they do that, as soon as you file that paperwork, then you have told the DEA says you have to cease all work with sacrament until we give you approval. And they never give approval. They have never given approval. Only two churches have been given Supreme Court approval to bypass the Controlled Substances Act because they were sued by the government and then they turned around and proved their sincerity to the government, right? So the burden of proof is on the government again, like I said. And so our attorney and I just love that he did this. Evan Park, he's moved on to Saudi Arabia on a private firm out there now, but man, he really did us a solid, and he wrote a beautiful, extensive letter that's posted on our website. Anybody can see it. Go to the legal notice at the very bottom of our sanctuary.org page, and you will see this beautiful letter that Evan wrote on behalf of Sanctuary that cites many court cases and basically says, good luck trying to prove that we're not sincere. And I mean that the proof is in the pudding because we live this on a daily. This has been, like I said, I tried to start a psilocybin church in 2000 whatever it was, 14 or 15, you know. So I'm very grateful that the 25 years of sincere devotion that I've had to this sacrament can be leveraged for others to come under this umbrella of sanctuary. And that's entirely what my intention has been, is to provide a safe place for sincere explorers to come and have a community where they can be supported and where they can be support, because that's where the real healing happens. When
Mm-hmm.
you are of service to others, that's when you start to heal.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I think that is a inherent, for many people at least. I think that's an inherent message we get from the psilocybin experience in particular.
Absolutely.
Um,
Hmm.
that it, my life didn't start to improve until I started doing that. That was and
Absolutely. So
uh,
it's so true. I mean, even myself, that was like, as I was sitting here, working through this kind of depression that took over yesterday, or that I found myself in yesterday. You know, that's what, as I sat there, I knew that the thing that I had to do to dig myself out of this hole was just to find something that I could do that would help another person. We, it's okay that we get value out of being of service. It's
mhm.
okay that we get meaning and purpose through being of service, and it doesn't have to be huge. You know, like, what got me out of it, or got me the service that I was providing, is that there's a fucking hole in my wall. Like, I'm doing some remodeling, and a bat came in from the attic last night and scared the hell out of my son, and I was like feeling like I want my son to feel safe and secure. So I'm gonna go do, like, I just make this little step, cut some drywall. Oh, I don't feel like it. And then, you get the ball rolling. You're like, oh, okay. I'm doing something that is going to help someone feel safe. It's going to help someone feel comfortable in their own home. So yeah, there's just so much power in that, man. And like, I just fucking love you, John.
I love you
What
too,
I have
man.
seen you, how I've seen you showing up for people. But they're like, that's it. Like, I see you showing up for people. I see you putting yourself out there just to be of service to people, you know. And so that's how we're gonna build the new world.
Hmm. Definitely. Um, I know we're coming up probably on time here pretty quick. I want to. Are there any case, like, I don't know, I guess case studies or instances from all your time in Jamaica that stick out regarding someone who was suffering from like severe chronic pain that experienced a major shift? Maybe not even necessarily the pain itself,
Oh
but
yeah.
how they view the pain. I mean that's
Oh
just
yeah.
as big, you
Oh
know.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, it's hard. It'd be hard for me to nail down any one in particular, because with the chronic pain, I think, like you're saying, is that it's not so much that the pain itself goes away, but your relationship to the pain.
Hmm.
You know, I myself, I have dealt with a lot of chronic pain, shoulder pain, um, and um, I've turned to look at it more from an energetic, balance perspective, rather than kind of, how do I alleviate this experience. It's, how do I learn from this experience? How does this experience inform my decisions and my behavior, on a more daily incremental basis? Um, I have seen so many insane shifts in perspective that could just be termed as nothing short of a miracle, honestly. Um, but I think all of that ultimately goes back to a shift in perspective on whatever the symptom is,
Hmm.
you know. Um, and then there's also the the motivation that comes with that shift in perspective to get to the gym, to get to, whatever it is. Myself, I found that a lot of my chronic pain on the left. There were some really powerful messages that came through human beings in the mushroom space and my own experience that related to water in particular. And I started swimming again. Like I used to swim a lot when I was a kid. And then in like the second, third grade, my eyesight got real bad. They put me in glasses and I wouldn't swim because I couldn't see. And once I kind of woke up to this realization that the element of water was missing from my life, and that I needed to get back into swimming, and I have done that. It's helped significantly reduce my shoulder pain,
Mm-hmm.
and also there were many messages that came in around strength building. Julie, a member of Sanctuary, her and her
Mm-hmm.
husband came down to Maico, and sorry, my beautiful dog, he's walking up on me. And they, her husband in particular, his experience taught me so much about um, that my need for strength building, and so I started going to the gym and doing more weightlifting and whatnot. About 6 months to a year after working with him, and that drastically changed my experience and my symptoms. So yeah, I've seen a lot of alleviation of pain through behavior change brought on by the experience, and through perspective change brought on
Yeah,
through the experience.
that's where my improvement was. I mean, my experience reduced my pain to a certain extent, but it was what I learned in it and what I applied every day for the
Hmm.
next 6 months that finally
Hmm.
got me out of pain. That was
That's
that.
the thing with the psychedelics,
Mm-hmm.
is that they'll tell you all, they'll give you the goods, but then you got to implement it
Mm-hmm.
if you don't apply it. And that's what I've seen you do beautifully, and that's why you are such a success story.
Um, so let's, I guess, probably start time to start wrapping up here. Really quickly, for people who maybe aren't ready for the church route, is
Hmm.
more than integration an
You
option for
you
that?
mean the cult? You mean the
The
cult?
cult, the cult.
Yeah, more than integration, or MTI, is it's an offshoot of the church. It is a mission of the church, an
Hmm.
outreach of the church. Um, we definitely understand that not everybody is ready to get involved in a community like this. I am the product of an enormous amount of religious trauma, and I understand
Hmm.
that many people are. So I completely respect that, and wouldn't want anybody, before they're ready, trying to come into this at all. I am the most non-evangelical um, minister you'll ever meet. Um, but MTI, we are opening up more and more to the public. Bill and his music integration work. Bill Prossman is an amazing musician, and he's not a therapist, certified therapist, but he has worked in music therapy for a very long time with
Bill's amazing. Yeah.
veterans. Bill is a fucking gem. I love that guy so much. And he's doing some stuff with us that is open to the public. We are starting an LGBTQ community that is going to be open to the public. Courtney's going to be doing a women's circle and a women's microdosing that's going to be open to the public. The microdosing, or what we call the subtle sacrament, itself will not be open to the public, because as a church we do actually ship sacrament. We gift sacrament. It's always at no cost to our members. There is a cost for the coaching and the enrollment in the program, but it's fucking
It's
way lower. Oh my God.
it's trivial compared to what's on the open market. Yeah, absolutely
I
trivial.
know. Sometimes people say like, "Oh, I can't believe you're like this is a $300 course or whatever." I'm like, "Oh my God, have you checked out
Yeah,
what's happening out there? Like
yeah.
$800 for no mushrooms, you know?" So anyway, it's a thing. Um, and let's see what else is opening up to. But anyway, MTI, more than integration, because this concept being that integration is more than just talk therapy, is becoming this publicly accessible interface where there are a variety of modalities. I don't know that we've talked about your um, your work in MTI being open to the public yet, but I would suspect that you are very open to that,
Yeah,
and
we had one very
hope
brief conversation a couple months back. We need to revisit that.
that's we have just in the last week,
hmm
it's come back on the table, and we are bringing all this kind of public access into the format. So yeah, it's definitely something that we need to talk about.
For people who are interested in at least seeing what Sanctuary is all about, where should they go?
If you want to be a member of our cult, then no. So sanctuary.org is the website. We have every Sunday we have a service from 10 to noon on Zoom. The link for that is on the homepage. That's open to the public. It's 30 minutes of meditation, journaling, reading from a few inspirational texts, and then we have a 90-minute conversation that is more like the traditional talk integration, but we usually use those inspirational texts as a kind of a jumping off point for those
hmm
conversations. And as you know, those are some incredibly powerful conversations. I am continually amazed at what I hear from folks and how inspired I feel after those conversations. We're running 70 people or so on those calls right now, expecting that to grow pretty soon, or it's just continuing to grow. Other ways to just kind of engage with Sanctuary. Uh, as John mentioned, my wife and I, Courtney, we have a podcast called Psilocybin Says, where we talk some about the church, but really it's a psychedelic lifestyle podcast.
hmm
Um, Kind of want people to get familiar with us, since we are currently, I guess, the most public figures within the church, and we are, directing a lot of the programs and whatnot. Then, we feel like it's really important for people to get to know us to an extent before deciding to engage.
hmm
Um,
Yeah, there's no lack of
and
content for people who want to get to know you guys. There's
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. We try a YouTube channel. We
hmm
try to just be, I don't know. Courtney and I both have the curse of overproductivity. Her parents are attorneys, and my parents were ran a construction business, so we just like both grew up working all the time, which is a balance that we're seeking to find a little better. Sanctuary is definitely an immersive experience for us. It's like all the time, which is fine. We have some calls tonight I'm looking forward to.
I'll be on one of
But
them.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot. Oh, great. Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to engage with us. To check us out. Instagram is out there and all that stuff. Instagram and Facebook. But really, the best way to get the flavor of the community, first off the bat, are these Sunday services. And then if
hmm
you feel like it's something that you want to be, more engaged with, and you can still do that as a non-member as long as you want to. And then if you feel like, this is something that you want to contribute to, that you want to be an active, engaged part in, then we've all got all kinds of different trainings and workshops and all kinds of stuff for people to get engaged in. We're having people that are actually moving to Louisville from California and other places
hmm
to come be a part of building this from the ground up. And we're also, like I said, we're looking for serious people who are committed to service to help bring sanctuary, you know, in person to other places around the country.
hmm Uh, I'll give my little bit on the. I was hooked after the very first Sunday service I went to. That was, uh, and this is I'm a person who absolutely hated church as a kid. And as soon as my parents stopped making me go, and when we moved to Albuquerque and my mom couldn't find a church she liked, I was like, thank God.
Thank you, God, for no more church.
and,
Yep.
and now, I mean, even if I'm on vacation, it's I make time for it. It doesn't matter if I'm out of town. There's been one service I've missed, and it's because I was just so sick. I couldn't do anything, and that's the. It's remarkable how much value I find in something that I would have never in my life thought that I would find value in.
And we hear that all the time. We hear that all the time. But I mean, there's not a lot of places where you can go and have a really vulnerable, intentional
Hmm.
conversation that is just exploring possibilities and new ways of thinking.
Hmm.
And that's really all. I think if there's anything that I do well, it is knowing that I don't know,
Hmm.
and that's kind of that's what I try to bring into those when I lead those calls. That's what I always try to bring into it. I don't have a fucking clue what's going on. We're all exploring this together.
Hmm.
There are these different interesting concepts that we can, take pieces from and leave pieces behind. And yeah, it's just a process of evolution.
Hmm. All right. I think that's all the questions I've got for you. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before we go?
No, not that I can think of. You know, that's I think it's very thorough, and I've very much enjoyed this conversation.
I
If
have
anybody wants
too.
to check me out on my personal social media. Um, I am Reverend Spore Spreader on Instagram and um, Twitter. Recently started getting involved in Twitter space just a little bit, but I try not to be too social media. I got a pretty big LinkedIn following, I guess,
Yeah,
or
you've
whatever.
got
I'm also on
several
there.
thousand people following you on LinkedIn, I've seen.
Yeah, it's almost 4,000 I saw this
Hmm.
morning. So, which is nice. It's cool to, I don't know. The whole social media and all that, it's kind of like, I don't know. It's like what value is there? But I've actually had a number of people, particularly on LinkedIn, who have reached out and said how much they appreciate kind of what I share because I do try to be really authentic, even in social media.
Hmm.
You know, life is fucking hard and everybody knows it. And I think most of us are getting tired of this glam shot shit show that's like,
Hmm.
oh, look at, it's like it's fake. It's
Hmm.
fake. And so I just really try to present the most authentic. I saw this thing today that's saying in terms of when they've done um, magnetic resonance imaging of brain scans that the um, that what creates the highest kind of electromagnetic field is not love necessarily, it's authenticity. So whenever you are being true to yourself, whatever you're feeling, and you're just being so real, like that is our power. And I
Hmm.
think that is a lot of what psychedelics teach us. Embrace your authenticity, be yourself. That whatever you call the creator, whatever you call the impetus, whatever is behind the scenes here, it's our resistance to allowing that light to shine is where the majority, if not all, of our problems, sickness, challenges come from. So the more we just can embrace our true self, then the more beautiful world we help to create.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, John.